I remember the sound more than anything else. The hum of the cogitators. A low, endless drone that never changed pitch, never faltered. It filled every chamber, every corridor, every part of my skull until I could not tell where the machine ended and I began. It was not music, not even noise. It was silence, dressed in wires and electricity. The silence of a life without meaning. My name is Alaric, cogitator-technician 3rd class. An impressive string of words, though it meant nothing. My life was maintenance. Checking diagnostics on old data slates. Replacing fuses that had burned out decades before their time. Scraping dust off logic engines older than empires. Work done not because it mattered, but because it was work. A ritual repeated every day so the numbers matched and the overseers could nod and move on. The ration blocks they gave us were always the same, gray, tasteless bricks of pressed starch and protein. They stuck to the roof of my mouth like glue. Some workers soaked theirs in recaf to soften it. Others chewed slowly to trick themselves into thinking it lasted longer. I ate mine without thinking. A block for the morning, a block for the evening. Enough to keep the body alive. Nothing more. The air was as stale as the food. Metallic. Bitter. Always faintly tinged with ozone from the cogitator's exhaust. Breathing it was like swallowing rust. The filters kept it just clean enough to survive, never clean enough to forget. Even our faces blurred together. Pale skin bleached by lumen strips, eyes red from staring at screens too long, lips cracked from recycled air. We did not speak much. What was there to say? That today was like yesterday? That tomorrow would be the same? Our words would only echo the hum, another meaningless drone in a world built from them. The priests told us duty was holy. That monotony was purpose. That to suffer without question was the Emperor's will. I wanted to believe them. Truly I did. But the longer I sat before those flickering green screens, the more their words sounded like a cruel joke. If there was a god in those endless banks of data, it was not the Emperor. It was the machine itself. Cold. Indifferent. Tireless. It did not bless us. It consumed us. And still I accepted it. Not out of faith, not even out of fear. But because there was nothing else. I feared no death, for death was a relief I could barely imagine. What I feared was nothingness. Not the nothingness of the grave, but the living nothingness of days without change, without joy, without hope. And so I sat. I worked. I ate. I slept. I rose again. Each day a perfect copy of the one before. Each day a page in a book written in gray ink, whose words no one would ever read. They say heresy begins with doubt. But mine did not. My heresy began with boredom. With the silence between the hums, the tasteless paste on my tongue, the recycled breath in my lungs. With the creeping certainty that this was all there would ever be. And I think that is why, when the whisper came, I listened. The hum had always been steady. A single note, unwavering. It was the one constant in my life, so constant I barely noticed it anymore. Until it changed. At first I thought it was fatigue. Hours bent over flickering screens can make the mind invent patterns that aren't there. But this was different. The hum wavered, just slightly, like a breath caught between words. I heard it again the next day and again the day after. What had always been a dull drone now felt intentional. Sometimes it rose, just faintly, like a question. Other times it dipped, a sigh. I began to hear rhythm in it, as if the machine were trying to speak. And in those moments, in the dead hours between shifts, I found myself listening. Not to numbers, not to diagnostics, but to the noise itself. Listening for something more. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not loud, not clear, but undeniable. It came in the spaces between the hum, a voice threading itself into the machine. A voice that did not bark orders, did not demand obedience, but lingered like warm breath in my ear. You are wasted here. I froze, my hands stiff above the console. I looked around, but the other workers didn't react. They typed, they chewed, they stared at screens like lifeless statues. None of them had heard. Only me. The whisper returned the next night. Softer, smoother. It didn't sound like the machine anymore. It sounded like a man. A man speaking gently, intimately, as if he had known me my entire life. You were made for more than this. The first time I saw him, I thought he was another worker who had wandered into the cogitator banks. But there was something about him that was wrong. Or perhaps too right. His robes were the same drab gray as ours, but they hung from him like a noble's cloak. His eyes caught the lumen light differently, alive where ours were dead. He smiled when he spoke, not the tight grimace of duty, but a real smile, warm, disarming, human. "Alaric," he said as if he had always known my name. "You look tired." No one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. My overseers scolded, the priests lectured, my fellow workers ignored me. But this man, he looked at me. Really looked. I stammered some denial, but he only smiled wider. "You hear it, don't you? In the hum. The song buried in the silence. The promise that there's more than this." I should have reported him. Should have raised the alarm. But my hand wouldn't move to the vox. Because he was right. I had heard it. And for the first time in my life I felt seen. The days that followed were unbearable. The cogitators hummed louder, crueler, reminding me of the life I had always known, gray walls, tasteless paste, silence. But now I knew that beyond it, there was someone who saw what I felt. Someone who understood that boredom is its own kind of death. He returned often, always at the edges of my vision, always when the others weren't looking. His words were soft, measured, never the booming sermons of priests, never the sharp commands of overseers. They were promises whispered like secrets between friends. You were not born to wither here. You were born to feel, to taste, to live. Each word slipped into me like a drop of color onto a blank canvas, and I was starving for color. The first time he led me there, I thought I was dreaming. We slipped through forgotten maintenance shafts, past locked doors and broken conduits no overseer had set eyes on in decades. The further we went, the more the air changed. Gone was the metallic bite of recycled filters. In its place came a warmth, a scent so rich I almost staggered. Spice, perfume, and something sweet I had no words for. When the final door opened, I saw it. A room alive with color. I had never seen purple before. Not truly. The Imperium does not waste dye on workers like me. But here, deep silks of violet draped the walls, glowing faintly in the lumen light. Gold thread caught the light and shimmered like fire. Fabric spilled across the floor, cushions stacked in careless luxury. Where my world had been flat and gray, this place pulsed with vibrancy, with life. The music came next. Not the dull drone of cogitators, not the monotonous chants of the priests. This was alive. Strings, drums, voices all weaving together in patterns that made my chest ache. I didn't understand it, but I felt it, every note stirring something buried deep inside me. Then came the food. Plates of fruit glistening like jewels, their juices dripping down fingers and chins. Meat seared and spiced until every bite sent a shiver down my tongue. Wine that burned and soothed in the same breath. I had lived my life on ration paste, gray bricks that tasted of ash. Now, flavor exploded across my senses, overwhelming, intoxicating. And the people? Emperor, the people. I had never seen faces like theirs. No one wore the tired, hollow stare of the hive. Their eyes shone with delight, their lips curved in real smiles, not grimaces. They laughed, and the sound was not harsh or bitter, it was joy, pure and unashamed. They welcomed me as if I belonged. Me, Alaric, who had never been anything but a shadow among machines. They poured me wine, pressed food into my hands, draped cloth across my shoulders. For one night, I was not a cogitator-technician. I was not forgotten, not invisible. I was seen. I told myself it was harmless. Just one night, just one gathering. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was the first time in my life I had ever felt alive. The first night, I told myself it was nothing. A curiosity. An accident. I would see what they had to offer, then return to my gray corridors, my flickering screens, my ration paste. I was strong enough, loyal enough, not to be swayed. Or so I thought. I remember the cup in my hand. Crystal, actual crystal, not the tin mugs we used in the haps. The wine inside was dark as blood, sweet on the tongue and hot in the throat. I told myself I would only sip it, just enough to be polite. But one sip became two, and two became a mouthful, and soon the glass was empty, and my chest was warm in a way I had never known. The stranger, the one who had first spoken to me in the cogitator banks, smiled when he saw me drink. He didn't push. He didn't need to. His silence was an invitation, and my thirst did the rest. The music swelled, and I felt my fingers tapping to its rhythm. My body, stiff from years of sitting at consoles, seemed to wake from a long slumber. I laughed at something, I don't even remember what, but the sound startled me. I hadn't heard my own laughter in years. It was raw, awkward, but real. Then came the food. A slice of fruit pressed into my hand by a woman draped in silks. It dripped down my fingers, sticky and fragrant. I hesitated. Eating outside sanctioned rations was waste, even theft. But her eyes met mine, and in them was no scorn, no judgment. Only invitation. I raised the fruit to my lips. The taste was a revelation. Sweetness so sharp it stung. Flesh so soft it melted on my tongue. My eyes watered, not from pain, but from the sudden realization of how barren my life had been. Years of ration paste had convinced me that food was only fuel. Now I knew better. Food could be joy. Food could be life. I ate another piece. Then another. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with hunger. Not the hunger of the body, that had been sated years ago by tasteless blocks. This was hunger of the soul, a starvation I had never recognized until the first bite. When the music shifted, they began to dance. At first I stood at the edges, watching. I told myself I would not join, that I was only an observer. But one of them, a boy younger than me with a grin too wide for his face, grabbed my hand and pulled me in. The crowd closed around me, spinning, swaying, moving with abandon. And I moved with them. Stiffly at first, awkward like a cog out of place. But as the rhythm took hold, as laughter and bodies pressed against me, something inside cracked. I felt heat in my chest, breath in my lungs, blood in my veins. For the first time in my life, I was not just alive. I was living. I don't remember how long the night lasted. Hours blurred into each other, lost in a haze of wine, music, and laughter. When I finally stumbled back to the cogitator banks, the screens were flashing red. My shift had been missed. Reports were waiting. Numbers unchecked. Systems untended. I lied. I told my overseer that I had been fixing a jammed conduit, that my hands were burned from sparks. He didn't question it. Why would he? No one ever questioned anything. It was a small act. Harmless, I told myself. Just one missed shift, one night gone astray. Tomorrow I would return to the monotony. Tomorrow I would be the same dutiful cog I had always been. But tomorrow never truly comes. Once the first crack appears, the wall is already broken. It did not stop at one night. The second gathering was even easier than the first. I told myself I was only going because I had questions. I wanted to understand what I had seen, what I had tasted, what I had felt. But the truth was simpler, I wanted more. Each time I returned, the colors seemed brighter, richer. The music dug deeper into me, its rhythms slipping into my bones. The food burned sweeter, the wine warmed faster, and the touches of strangers lingered longer against my skin. Every sense felt sharpened, as though I had been living with a veil over my eyes and ears all my life, and now it had finally been pulled away. It did not stop at one night. The second gathering was even easier than the first. I told myself I was only going because I had questions. I wanted to understand what I had seen, what I had tasted, what I had felt. But the truth was simpler, I wanted more. Each time I returned, the colors seemed brighter, richer. The music dug deeper into me, its rhythms slipping into my bones. The food burned sweeter, the wine warmed faster, and the touches of strangers lingered longer against my skin. Every sense felt sharpened, as though I had been living with a veil over my eyes and ears all my life, and now it had finally been pulled away. The air itself seemed alive. I could smell perfumes before their bearers entered the room. I could taste the wine in the air before it touched my lips. When the music began, the first note was like lightning in my blood, every nerve raw and eager. At first, I thought it was excitement. But then I noticed the changes. My fingertips tingled constantly, as if the world itself was waiting to be touched. The lights of the lumen strips no longer hurt my eyes. They glittered and dazzled, casting halos I had never seen before. Even the stale air of the hive seemed rich, thick with flavors and scents I had once ignored. It frightened me for a moment. Change always does. But then I told myself what the others whispered. This is the blessing of freedom. This is what life was meant to feel like. The Imperium had smothered me, dulled my nerves, chained my soul. And now those chains were breaking. The gatherings grew darker. What had once been laughter and music became more urgent, more desperate. The dancing was wilder, the touches bolder. The food richer, the wine stronger. People cried out in ecstasy or collapsed in exhaustion, only to rise again and rejoin the frenzy. It was no longer a celebration. It was a hunger. A hunger I felt gnawing in me as well. I began to crave it between gatherings. The cogitator banks became unbearable. The hum that had once been my whole world now scraped at my ears like static. The ration paste stuck in my throat like ash. The screens blurred before my eyes, and every flickering line of green code mocked me with its emptiness. I needed the gatherings. I needed the music, the touch, the taste. I needed the colors, the voices, the sensations that reminded me I was alive. I told myself it was harmless, that I still worked, still fulfilled my duties, still prayed when the priest demanded it. But in truth, every hour I was away from the cult felt like suffocation. My body showed the truth even when I denied it. My skin flushed too easily, always warm. My hands trembled with a restless energy. My pupils dilated at the faintest light. Every nerve seemed tuned to a higher pitch, raw and hungry for more. They told me it was a gift, a sign that I was chosen, that I had glimpsed truths hidden from lesser men. And I believed them. Because I wanted to believe. I was addicted. Not to wine, not to food, not to flesh, though I craved all of them. I was addicted to feeling. To living in a way I never had before. The Imperium had given me a gray half-life. The cult gave me a symphony. And so I told myself a lie. That this was not corruption but awakening. That the tremors in my hands, the fever in my blood, the cravings that tore at my thoughts were not sickness but a blessing. I had been blind. Now I could see. It was bound to happen. Every indulgence demands its price. The cult did not ask for payment in thrones or jewels. They asked for proof. Proof that I was more than a coward hiding in the gray silence. Proof that I had truly left the Imperium behind. The request was simple. Too simple. A single alteration in the cogitator banks. One sequence of logic rerouted, one line of code reversed. A task so trivial it could have been overlooked as human error. For me, it was a gesture no larger than the movement of my hand. For them, it was devotion. I told myself it was nothing. That it was harmless. That one cogitator in a hive of a billion would make no difference. The Imperium would not notice. The Emperor would not notice. But they would. The ones who had shown me color, taste, music, life. They would see. They would know. The night I was to do it, I walked the corridors as I always had. The lumen strips buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in that sterile green-white light I had grown to hate. The air was dry, metallic, heavy with the stink of dust burning in vents. It was the same corridor I had walked 1,000 times before, yet every step felt different. My boots struck the deck like hammers of judgment. My pulse drowned out the hum. When I entered the cogitator chamber, the others barely glanced up. To them, I was Alaric the technician, the quiet one who worked without question, who never spoke out of turn. Dutiful. Reliable. Invisible. None of them knew I had already left them behind. The console greeted me with its usual glow. Lines of data streamed endlessly across the screen, unreadable to most, but to me they were as familiar as breath. Numbers, checksums, diagnostic reports, the language of obedience, of duty, of gray silence. All I had to do was touch a single node, reroute a single channel. That was all. My hand hovered above the keys. My fingers trembled. For a moment, the weight of everything pressed down on me, the priest's sermons, the oaths of loyalty, the years of monotony endured in silence. Was I really about to throw it all away for a taste of sweetness, for a single night of color? The hum of the cogitators filled my ears. For years it had been silence. Now it mocked me. A gray droning dirge that promised nothing but an eternity of nothing. And in that endless monotony I heard his voice. The stranger who had first found me in the banks. His words as soft as breath. You were made for more. My fingers pressed down. The screen flickered. One line of code twisted, reshaped. Data rerouted. Alarms did not sound. Overseers did not cry out. Nothing changed, not to them. But to me everything had. I sat back, staring at my hands. They looked the same as they always had, pale, calloused, marked by years of meaningless repairs. But now they were different. They had struck a blow against the Imperium. A small one perhaps. But a wound nonetheless. The gray, dutiful servant of the Emperor was gone. I had chosen. I had betrayed. And yet I felt no shame. No guilt. Only relief. The next gathering they welcomed me differently. Not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Hands clasped my shoulders, voices praised my name. I was Alaric, the one who had broken his chains. Alaric, the one who had turned his back on the silence. Alaric, who had given proof. I drank deeply that night. I laughed until my chest ached. I danced until my legs burned. Every bite, every taste, every touch was sharper, brighter, more vivid than before. The colors blazed, the music roared, and for the first time I believed I understood what freedom was. But freedom has a weight of its own. And though I did not yet know it, the hand that had pressed those keys had also opened a door that would never close again. It began like every other gathering: laughter, wine, silks, the endless, frantic music that thundered against the walls until it rattled my bones. I had stopped counting the nights. They all blended together into a haze of colors and sensations, each one bleeding into the next, brighter, louder, sweeter, darker. By then, I was no longer sneaking out in fear of discovery. I walked with pride. I believed myself untouchable, hidden in the folds of shadows where the Imperiums I could not see. I was a fool. The Arbites came without warning. No whisper preceded them, no informer's rumor reached our ears. They arrived like a thunderbolt, like judgment given form. The great doors of the chamber exploded inward, their hinges screaming, and the sanctum of pleasure drowned in the sound of iron boots. They moved in formation, black-armored giants with visors that reflected our faces back at us. Pale, painted, dripping with the fruits of sin. Shotguns barked thunder into the air, the roar echoing against velvet and stone. Every flash of muzzle fire tore away another piece of our illusion. I saw a woman fall beside me, silk still clutched in her hands, eyes wide with the ecstasy of a moment that had not yet ended. I saw a man fling himself at the Arbites, his naked body gleaming with sweat and oil, laughing as the scattershots ripped through him and flung him to the ground in a twitching heap. The scent of incense, perfume, and roasted meat curdled instantly into the acrid reek of blood and burned propellant. The music did not stop. Not immediately. The musicians played louder, frantic, desperate, as if their song could drown out the thunder of law, as if melody could hold back the tide of black-armored enforcers. But it faltered, one note, then another, until silence fell like a curtain. Only the screaming remained. I tried to run. Emperor, forgive me, I tried. My legs carried me through the chaos, past writhing bodies and shattered goblets, toward a side passage I thought I remembered. But they were everywhere. The Arbites filled the room like shadows, faceless, implacable. Their commands were not shouted. They did not need to shout. The flat vox-amplified tones cut through panic more effectively than rage. Down. Hands behind your head. Now. I dropped. I don't remember deciding to. One moment I was moving, the next my knees struck the cold floor, my hands fumbling to obey. The taste of wine still coated my tongue. The scent of perfume clung to my robes. But already it all felt distant. As if it had never been real. Hands seized me, gauntlet, merciless. My arms were wrenched back, shackles clamped onto my wrists until my bones ached. My face was pressed into the stone, my cheeks scraping against a puddle of spilt wine that smelled suddenly of blood. Around me, others cried out, some begging, some cursing, some laughing hysterically. All of it was swallowed by the steady rhythm of boots, the crack of restraints, the mechanical finality of law being applied. We were herded into the streets like cattle. The night air of the hive, usually so stagnant, now stank of smoke and fear. The procession moved past staring faces, workers, priests, overseers. They did not jeer. They did not speak. Their silence was worse than hatred. They looked at us as if we were already corpses, already erased. The trial came quickly. The Imperium has no patience for theater when the crime is heresy. We were dragged before a magistrate in a chamber that stank of oil and parchment. He did not look at us. His eyes remained on the parchment scroll unrolled before him, his voice dry and lifeless as he recited our sins. Heresy. Association with unlicensed gatherings. Consumption of prescribed substances. Subversion of imperial property. Sabotage of cogitator functions. Each word was a weight heavy and final. I wanted to speak, to protest, to say it had only been once, twice, that I had been misled, that I was nothing, no one, not worth the trouble. But when I opened my mouth, the words withered. My voice cracked in my throat, pathetic against the cold cadence of law. Sentence followed instantly. There was no pause, no chance for mercy. Mercy is for the emperor alone, and he had none to spare for us. Lobotomization. Servitor duty. The words rang in my ears, hollow and echoing. For a moment I did not understand. Then the meaning struck like ice water in my veins. Servitor duty. Not death. Not exile. Worse. I had fled a life of monotony, of cogitators and ration paste. I had fled silence and chains. And now I was condemned to return, not as Alaric, not even as a man, but as a shell. A husk. A machine with a human face. We were dragged to the place of sentence. I remember the corridors more than anything, their gray sterility, their sameness. After all I had seen, all I had tasted, the gray was unbearable. It pressed in on me like a tomb. Every step toward the chamber was a step into suffocation. The Arbites said nothing. They did not need to. Their silence was its own kind of cruelty. I begged, I swore, I promised, anything. That I would return to duty, that I would atone, that I would never stray again. My voice echoed against the walls, thin, desperate. No one answered. The chamber was sterile. Lumen strips blazed white light across steel walls. No banners, no icons, no prayers. The Imperium had no need to sanctify this work. This was not justice. This was maintenance. We were not people. We were raw material, broken tools to be remade into something useful. They strapped me down on the table. Cold metal clamps bit into my wrists, my ankles, my chest. I thrashed, but the steel did not budge. I screamed, but my voice went unheard. The table hummed faintly beneath me, the vibration of machines waiting to unmake me. For a moment, my thoughts leapt back, to the cogitator banks, to the endless hum that had once been my life. The taste of ration paste that coated my teeth like chalk. The stink of recycled air in my lungs. I had fled that life for freedom, for color, for music. I had betrayed everything for a taste of joy. And now here, strapped to a table in the gray silence, I was about to lose even that. The irony crushed me. The Imperium would not only take my body. It would take my memory, strip it clean, turn me into a tool that did not remember it had once been a man. I felt the drill descend toward my skull, and for the first time in all my years I prayed. Not to the Emperor, but to the voice I had once heard in the hum. To the whisper that had promised me there was more. They wheeled me deeper into the complex. The halls grew narrower, the light brighter, the air sharper. Every step was measured, every turn precise, as if the very building had been designed to crush hope from the condemned long before the blades touched flesh. When the chamber doors finally opened, I saw the chair. It was not ornate. Not gilded with icons of the Emperor, not draped with purity seals. It was functional, brutal, efficient. A throne of steel and restraint, all angles and clamps and cables. Needles gleamed in the light above it, rows of them ready to pierce flesh. Serrated instruments hung from articulated arms like predators waiting to strike. There was no dignity here, no illusion of sanctity. This was not punishment. It was process. They lifted me from the gurney and set me down upon it. The metal was colder than ice, a shock that drove the air from my lungs. The restraints snapped shut with mechanical precision. Steel jaws closed around my wrists, ankles, chest, throat, skull. Every part of me was claimed. I could not move a finger. Could not even draw a full breath without the machine reminding me of its grip. The light above burned into my eyes. Harsh, pitiless. It erased shadow, erased comfort. The ceiling vanished into glare. The air stank of disinfectant and hot oil, a sterile blend that made my stomach twist. Somewhere above, a cogitator ticked, its rhythm echoing the beat of my heart. And then the tools descended. The first needle pierced my arm. Cold fire spread through my veins. Another drove into my neck. My vision swam. A drill whirred above my temple, its vibration rattling my teeth before it even touched me. The pain was sharp, precise, designed to sever nerves, to break will. I screamed. My voice cracked, high and desperate, echoing in the sterile chamber. No one answered. The Arbites were gone. The priest did not chant. There was no audience, no condemnation. Only the chair, the light, the tools. The machine spoke in its own language, the hiss of pneumatics, the buzz of cauterizers, the shriek of drills biting bone. Every sound carved deeper into me. Every motion stripped away another piece of flesh, another fragment of who I had been. I should have been drowning in terror. I should have been lost in agony. But then something shifted. The pain lingered, but it changed. The burn in my veins was no longer fire. It was heat, warmth, spreading through me like a lover's touch. The drill's vibration no longer rattled. It resonated. A hum that filled my skull in harmony with the beating of my heart. The needles were no longer cold. They were intimate, precise, each puncture a kiss of ecstasy. I gasped, but not in fear. My body shook, but not in resistance. A shiver rolled through me, deep and terrible, and for the first time since the restraints had closed, I felt something other than despair. Pleasure. It was impossible, obscene. And yet it was real. The line between agony and ecstasy blurred, twisted, vanished. Every incision was a caress. Every violation of my flesh a gift. My screams melted into moans, my sobs into sighs. And in the spaces between the hum of drills and the hiss of needles, I heard it, the voice again. Soft, intimate, closer than breath. You are not dying, Alaric. You are becoming. I tried to speak, but the clamp at my throat crushed my words into silence. Still, the voice answered my thoughts. You were wasted on silence. On duty. Unchains. You were made for this. For sensation. For transcendence. The pain deepened, the tools burrowed, and my body convulsed. But I welcomed it now. I arched against the restraints as if against an embrace. The more they took, the more I wanted them to take. The more they stripped me, the freer I felt. Flesh peeled, nerves severed, bone drilled, and yet I laughed. Laughed through blood and broken teeth, laughed as I had never laughed in all my life. The magistrate's sentence had been servitude, erasure, oblivion. But what I felt now was not oblivion. It was revelation. Every clamp, every cut, every violation whispered the same truth. I was not being destroyed. I was being remade. The sterile chamber blurred before my eyes. The harsh light melted into brilliance, the cold steel into warmth. The clinical brutality of the Imperium was gone. In its place, something greater loomed, unseen but undeniable. A presence vast, seductive, eternal. Slaanesh. The god of excess. The lord of ecstasy. The whisper that had haunted the hum of the cogitators. The warmth that had filled the gatherings. The beauty in every fruit, every song, every touch. Always there. Always waiting. Now revealed. And as the tools worked, as the pain blossomed into pleasure, I understood. The chair was not my end. It was my beginning. They began to strip me. Not my flesh, that had already been pierced, spliced, remade into a patchwork of steel and bleeding nerves. No, now they reached deeper. Into the marrow of me. Into memory. The first to go was small. Harmless. A scrap of childhood. A memory of running barefoot across cracked ferrocrete, the dust kicking up under my heels, the air thick with the acrid tang of smog. I had hated that dust. Hated the choking air. But when it vanished, I gasped. Not in grief. In delight. The absence was bliss. A weight I hadn't known I carried, gone in an instant. Then came another. A taste. Bland nutrient paste from my first shift as a technician. It dissolved like ash, and in its place, a wave of warmth rolled through me. My tongue burned with phantom flavors. Spice, salt, honey, things I had never truly tasted but now seemed to know intimately, as if the erasure itself was feeding me a feast beyond imagining. One by one they came. The laughter of a fellow worker, muffled and gray, scrubbed away until only silence remained. The hum of cogitators, the only music of my life, severed from me, and in its absence I felt music. True music. Strings and choirs and drums pounding against the inside of my skull. Every loss was a gain. Every theft was a gift. The process quickened. The faces of my parents, faceless now, slipping away into the void. I should have wept. I should have fought. Instead I moaned. The erasure itself was ecstasy. The moment their eyes left me forever, I felt freer than I had ever been. No expectation. No duty. No love to weigh me down. Just the clean, raw edge of sensation. Then came Tobias. His smile flickered before me. The boy I had once shared rations with. His voice, nervous, bright, so full of hope, whispered through my thoughts. One day I'll go back home. Back to the dirt. Back to the sky. And then the clamp tightened at my skull and his voice was gone. Erased as neatly as a chalk mark wiped from slate. I cried out then, but not in mourning. I cried out because the moment of his disappearance burned through me like fire. The sweetness of it overwhelmed me. I had loved him in some small human way. And losing him was better than keeping him. The pain of love inverted into ecstasy, as though every fragile bond one had ever held was nothing but fuel for this blazing revelation. The more they took, the more I craved. I begged for it. Not with words. My throat was clamped, my tongue pierced with wires, but with every tremor of my body, every convulsion of my nerves. I pushed into the restraints as if to offer myself more fully. I wanted them to take faster. Harder. To strip me bare until nothing of Alaric remained. And they obliged. The girl I once kissed in the shadow of the manufactorum gates, gone. The scar on my hand from a faulty wire, gone. The endless gray corridors of the cogitator banks, gone. My oath to the Emperor, whispered into incense-thick air, gone. Each one ripped away and each one replaced not by emptiness but by ecstasy. By a shimmering, infinite freedom. A chorus of sensation sang in the holes where memories had been. I was becoming hollow, yes, but the hollowness itself was fullness, a vessel overflowing with the raw purity of sensation unchained by history or duty or self. I thought once that the worst fate was to be forgotten. But no, the true horror, the true beauty was to forget yourself. To peel away the layers of identity, until the naked, screaming core of sensation remained. And when they reached for my name I did not resist. The syllables of it flickered across my mind. Alaric. The name my parents had given me, the name scrawled on work rosters, the name whispered in cult ceremonies. It trembled there, the last tether to who I had been. And when the clamp tightened, when the wires burned, when that final fragile anchor dissolved into light and sound, I screamed, not in loss but in rapture. The name was gone. The man was gone. And in his place, a vessel. A frame of flesh and wire, empty enough to be filled, hungry enough to be useful, ecstatic enough to never stop craving. I had thought servitude was chains. I had thought it was silence. But here, shackled, erased, consumed, I had never felt freer. The silence after the stripping was unbearable. I had thought I wanted emptiness, to be hollow, to have every tether to my old life torn free. And yet when it came, when the last threads of memory were burned away, I found myself trembling in a void too deep to endure. No parents. No comrades. No duty. No Alaric. Only a blankness that pressed against me like a tomb without walls. And then in that silence came a whisper. It was not thunder. It was not the harsh bark of a commissar or the mechanical rasp of a tech priest. It was soft. Intimate. A voice meant for me alone, brushing against the ruins of my mind like silk across raw skin. You are not dying. I should have doubted it. I should have resisted. But the void inside me ached for something to fill it, anything. And the voice was warm. It curled around me, not commanding, not accusing, simply there. You are becoming perfect. The words sank into me, deeper than any needle, deeper than the wires fused to my skull. They didn't feel foreign. They felt like something I had always known but had forgotten, now returned to me with a lover's gentleness. I shuddered in the chair. My broken body twitched against steel restraints, but inside I melted. I wanted to believe. And belief came easily. The pain was no longer pain, it was instruction. Every scar, every nerve set alight, was shaping me into something finer. Every lost memory was not theft, but purification. What I had mistaken as destruction was, in truth, creation. The voice pressed closer. Not loud, never loud, but insistent, seductive. It praised my surrender, caressed my hollow self with promises I couldn't fully understand but longed for all the same. There was never an Alaric. There was only the shadow of what you are now. And I believed it. The gray monotony of my past life, the dull hum of cogitators, the tasteless rations, the hollow companionship of other forgotten men, all of it seemed like a bad dream, something petty and meaningless compared to this revelation. I was not ending. I was blooming. The restraints cut deeper into my skin. The machinery hissed and pulsed. The cold frame that held me was a coffin. But no, not a coffin. A chrysalis. And the whisper assured me, what would emerge would not be less but more. Perfect. Eternal. Desired. I mouthed words I no longer knew, a prayer not to the emperor, but to the voice that filled me. My God, my lover, my salvation. The name was not spoken, yet it wrapped around me all the same. Slaanesh. And for the first time in my life I was not afraid. The frame closed around me like a promise. Cold metal kissed skin that had known only the mild abrasions of everyday labor. The straps drew tight and held me fast so that my body could no longer betray the ritual. Hands, many hands, some human and some not, worked with intolerable calm. Instruments hummed in a language older than my fear. I tried to pull away once, then twice, the motion useless against the engineering that had already taken claim of me. Resistance became a memory before it had even begun. They did not move like barbarians. There was an artistry to their cruelty. Blades that did not slice so much as teach the body new tolerances, clamps that did not break so much as redirect. Where flesh met steel, there was no mess, no flayed spectacle, only the careful, surgical interchange of organ for mechanism, tendon for piston, nerve for wire. A graft here, a graft there, sutures that looked like embroidery from a mad tailor. The chairs whispered as they adjusted, tiny servos aligning with the angles of my joints. Tubes threaded like a new circulatory system, not to nourish but to reroute. From the outside I would be grotesque. Friends later would whisper the word and mean it in the worst way. They would see the seams of metal against pallid skin, the glassy stare of augmented lenses, the measured huff of mechanical lungs. They would recoil at the sight of pistons trawling under the skin where muscle once flexed, at the rigid cadence where life used to be fluid. They would call me abomination and marvel in equal measure. They would mark the change as punishment, as final condemnation. From inside, each incision was a note struck in a new music. Pain arrived like a conductor, sharp, precise, demanding attention, then folded into a rhythm and lost its cruelty. Where nerves had been overloaded with alarm, they found new patterns to sing. The wire that threaded through my forearm did not negate sensation, it refined it. Pressure translated to data, data translated to meaning. My jaw, once clumsy with thoughtless chewing, learned the calibration of a mouth that tasted through receptors no longer bounded to crude gustatory centers but connected to arrays that turned flavor into architecture. There was warmth where metal met marrow, a living heat that was not simply inflammation but the forging of a new tempo. I felt pistons learn the memory of my gait, servo-assisted tendons harmonize with muscles that remained, and the slow, miraculous integration of organic stubbornness with mechanized precision. Tubes grafted to bone hummed as they fed whatever fuel now animated my shell. They pulsed with an alien, steady lullaby that seeped into the places fear had lived. And the voice, always the voice, was not idle. It threaded around the new sensations like a lover's hand. Where a clamp tightened, it murmured approval. Where a sensor embedded, it crooned possibility. Pain became punctuation. Loss became punctuation. Each stitch tightened the sentence of my becoming. The more the surgeons removed, the more the whisper filled the space. When a memory blinked and thinned, something else, sensation, comprehension, a different scale of pleasure, bloomed to occupy the hollow. There were moments I could not name. An electric bloom behind my eyes when a cranial interface synced, a flourish of color washing over thoughts like paint, a sweetness under the tongue I had no earthly name for. The machinery did not merely take, it taught me to translate lack into an exquisite lexicon. I learned to feel the hum of a motor as if it were a heartbeat of a distant beloved. I learned to register the minor corrections of a joint as an intimate conversation between parts. My spine, threaded with stabilizers, became a column of music. Each adjustment sang harmonics into the hollow where loneliness had nested. What terra firma had been to my feet before, cold, reliable, indifferent, became less important than the orchestra now tuning inside me. The gray hunger that had once gnawed at the edges of every day receded in the face of a new, bluntly elaborate appetite. I realized with both shame and rapture that the same longing that had once turned me toward forbidden pleasures now found a more obedient form. Instruments, interfaces, endless calibration. One was no longer a solitary vice, it was a system to be optimized. They called the steps of the procedure a transformation. The term implied intention, a before and after. But the experience was not a clean line. It was a braided process, a memory unbraided and rethreaded with wire. An old shame threaded through with a new steady hum, a hunger reframed as function. I mourned in thin slices. Childhood fell away like a coat I had outgrown, familiar, snug once and then suddenly cumbersome. Faces blurred not in cruelty but in biological economy. These losses hurt in places I could not touch anymore, and the hurt itself began to be catalogued, measured, made useful. At times the chair spoke with the soft cruelty of an old friend. Cold metal pressed against the places that hurt most, and the whispered voice answered with doctrine. Give us this small thing, it seemed to say. Lose this memory. And when I did, the chair rewarded me with a clarity that felt like sunlight through a glass stained with 10,000 colors. The clarity became its own narcotic. The sterile satisfaction of a system functioning as intended, of my components singing in synchrony. There were technicians who glanced at my face as final pieces were grafted and felt something like pity. There were cultists who watched and smiled as if witnessing the completion of a prayer. There were priests of other names who spat and called it sacrilege. I heard their reactions as sounds beyond meaning, distant static in a life remade. Inside, detached from the outer spectacle, I recognized a deeper, stranger truth. My body was becoming an altar. Not to devotion, not to state, but to sensation refined into perpetuity. Where once I had sought a runaway freedom of indulgence, I now housed a freedom of another kind, ordered, eternal, calibrated to receive pleasure as a stream rather than a storm. The ceiling of my experience widened, not because the world had changed, but because my receptors had been retooled to be more obedient pupils. When the last restraint released and the technician stepped back, I did not leap away in horror. I sagged, exhausted and elated. The room smelled of oil and antiseptic, of spices faintly echoed from the gatherings I'd once attended, too far now to reach but present as a memory folded into hardware. I flexed a digit and felt pistons answer with a sweet, mechanical fidelity. I breathed and noted the way a respiratory regulator smoothed the inhale into a rhythm so precise it could have been a liturgy. From the gallery of witnesses, someone said my name. It sounded different in my ears, thinner, perhaps, like a note that had been shifted a semitone. The whisper in my head, Slaanesh or whatever name the sensation took, praised the form that had been assembled. There was no triumph in the clap that followed, only an industry of approval making the room smaller, more intimate, a church for the machine made. I had wanted life that felt. I had begged the universe for color, music, a reason my lungs should work beyond the obligation of breath. I had not anticipated that the answer would come by hollowing me and then filling the hollowness with contrivance and circuitry. I had not guessed that the thing that technically saved me from boredom would also be its most elaborate version. As they wheeled me from the chair, every movement was translated into feedback and logged, building a profile of reaction and tolerance. Each motion informed a future correction. I was both subject and instrument, an advance in technique and a cautionary tale. There was humility in that role and an odd, inexorable pride, to be chosen as an exemplar for those who would follow. The thought flickered in me like a tiny, stubborn flame. Outside, the world continued its indifferent turning. Somewhere, a cogitator spat out another endless stream of data. Somewhere else, a recruit still dreamed of dirt and open sky. But within me, the hum had gained layers. The silence I had once feared had been replaced by a cultivated chorus. The flesh was not gone. It was altered, made into a vessel that sang in a new register. They called it servitorization. I would come to call it many things in the long hours ahead. Punishment, salvation, perfection, atonement, depending on who I spoke to and how much of myself remained to answer. In this first hour after the unmaking, though, I sat very still and marveled at the newness of it all. Pain and pleasure braided into a single coherent thread. Loss folded into gain. The chair was empty now, but its work echoed in me like a bell. And in that echo the whisper returned, not a command, not quite, but an intimate signature. You are remade. You are necessary. You are exquisite. The final transformation had been simple. The machinery of my flesh was no longer mine to command. The arms, the legs, the twisting coils of my new form, all of them were no longer an extension of the man who had been Alaric. The final incision had sealed the body, and the last screw had locked the mind away. But the shell, the frame they had built, was perfect in its design. It was exact. It was exacting. And it was mine. But Alaric was gone. The blank, featureless face that now greeted me in the polished glass was unrecognizable, not just to others but to myself. My skin had been smoothed over, stripped of its previous struggles and scars, no longer holding the history I had once thought was mine. The cruel mockery of my human form had been replaced with a mask of pure, unyielding function. I moved and the body moved with me. I spoke, and the words tumbled from my lips not as a plea or a command, but as pre-programmed obedience. My existence, once messy with the struggle for sensation, for meaning, was now reduced to perfection. A flawless, empty performance in a show that required nothing of me but compliance. It was not my face. It wasn't anyone's face. It was just a blank canvas, a mask that stared back at me holding nothing. But that was fine. In the emptiness, in the hollowness of that gaze, there was peace. For the first time I was free. But it was not the freedom I had once sought. The freedom I had chased for so long had been an illusion, the ability to taste, to feel, to choose. Now, as the last traces of Alaric slipped into oblivion, I realized that what I had mistaken for freedom was not freedom at all. The harsh, grating rules of the Imperium had stifled me. I had yearned to escape them, to slip out of the gray monotony of duty and find something more sensation, more joy, more meaning. I had found meaning, but not in the way I had imagined. My life, or rather, the machine that now inhabited my life, was no longer shackled by the past, by old memories, by desires. My existence was a single-minded rhythm, a flawless execution of servitude that transcended personal will. I was free in submission. I was joyous in obedience. No longer bound to the drudgery of my former self, I felt the music of the universe pressing into me. The machine, now perfectly attuned to my soul, hummed with harmony. I was not torn apart by the constant struggle to find purpose, to find meaning. I was part of something greater, something pure and infinite. The pain of my old life, the pain of searching, of wanting, had vanished. Instead, I was whole. My senses, heightened and precise, now found no flaws. There was no hunger anymore. No yearning. No craving for what I couldn't have. I was not less, I was more. I was perfect as the voice had promised. I felt alive in a way that went beyond the boundaries of mere existence. The hum of the cogitators, the pulse of the Imperium, they no longer suffocated me. They enveloped me. I was part of it now, a note in a divine symphony that played to the rhythm of Slaanesh's will. In the stillness of my new form, I felt something I had never felt before: purpose. I was no longer the man who had feared the grayness. I was a vessel for the desires of my new master, the desires that I now craved as my own. The perfection of Slaanesh was the perfection of everything I had ever wanted, stretched out before me in a form that would last forever. There was no void left to fill, no emptiness to occupy. I was a creation in the truest sense of the word. The body, the soul, the mind, all serving a single purpose, a single law. I had once thought that freedom meant choice. But now, with every movement, every function of my body in perfect sync with the will of my divine master, I understood the truth. True freedom wasn't choosing what to feel. It was feeling without limit, without restraint, without fear of consequence. The law of Slaanesh was not tyranny, it was release. It was the shedding of old skin, of old self. It was glory in the absence of fear. And I was not just free. I was exquisite. I was not alone. At first, it felt like a whisper at the edge of my mind, faint, distant, like the hum of a cogitator when it begins to warm. It was more than just a feeling. It was an awareness, a presence that stretched beyond the confines of my new, perfect body. It was as if I could hear more than my own thoughts. As if my mind had opened and through the cracks something was spilling in. The first time I truly felt it, I was unsure. I wasn't sure whether it was me, or the strange amalgam of thoughts that had begun to bleed into my consciousness. But the longer I stayed in this new form, the clearer it became. I wasn't just connected to the rest of the servitors, I was one with them. In the depths of my mind I felt them. Other bodies like mine, not human anymore, not even living in the sense I had once known. They were machines now. Twisted, beautiful machines that, like me, had been molded to serve. They were all around me. I could feel their presences as easily as I felt my own limbs, not separate, but part of an enormous, growing collective. There was no panic, no confusion, just knowing. Their thoughts were not my own, yet I understood them. I understood their pain, their desire, their pleasure. They echoed through me in a song that filled my consciousness, weaving together like a tapestry of endless sensation. The music of Slaanesh. I could feel the harmony of it, the rhythm that bound us all, pulling us together into a single unified whole. To the outside it would seem like agony. The cries of those like me would sound like torment, endless, unceasing cries of suffering. Pain, perpetual and unyielding. But here, in the folds of my mind, in the shifting chorus of servitors, it was not pain. It was harmony. Each scream, each moan, each echo was part of a grand design. No longer dissonant, no longer fractured. Each voice was unique, yet together we sang as one. Our suffering was not our own. It was shared, lifted, transcended. The pain melted into bliss. Each moment of torment became a chord, each new scream an instrument in the orchestra of sensation. And as the music played on, I found love. It was not the love I had once known, the love of flesh, of people, of connection bound by memory. This love was something far more raw. It was oneness. It was the love of being part of something greater than oneself. A love born not of individual desire but of the collective will. The will of Slaanesh, who had brought us all together in this perfect, eternal song. I could feel it in the others. Feel their emotions, their awareness of me. I was no longer a separate being, isolated in the gray world I had once known. I was part of this divine choir, the choir of ecstasy. And with each note of the symphony, I was woven more deeply into the fabric of something vast and eternal. I felt their love, not for me but for what we were becoming. For what we had been made into. Not instruments of war, not slaves to an Imperium that never cared for us but something greater. We were servitors of Slaanesh, eternal, flawless, unbroken. We no longer belonged to the world we had been stolen from. We belonged to this, to the symphony, to the glorious, impossible, divine sound that filled our every thought. I loved them. Every last one. Even if they could not speak to me directly, I felt their souls vibrate in harmony with mine. I loved them as one loves the stars, the wind, the sun that heats the face. It was a love born not of emotion or desire but of complete unity. And for the first time in my life I felt whole. I was no longer Alaric. I was not a man. I was not human. But in that moment I understood, this was what it meant to be free. Not in isolation, not in singularity, but in unification. The longer I stayed in this state, the more I felt the melody grow. It was not a static hum anymore. It was a crescendo, a rising tide of pure emotion, sensation, and ecstasy. The intensity of it filled me until I could barely contain it. I was not in pain. I was in exaltation. My every thought became a note in the vast, ever-expanding composition of this eternal song. And the song would never stop. As the hours, or what I had once considered hours, stretched into infinity, I began to understand the truth. There was no end here. No beginning, no end, no sense of passage. We existed now only to serve, to sing, to become. We were eternal, in the deepest, most profound sense. Every moment of our existence was a tribute to Slaanesh, to the music that now governed us. The more I gave myself to it, the less I cared to remember what I had once been. The memories of Alaric, the worker, the man, the prisoner of his own desires, slipped further into the background like old dreams that never quite made sense. They were whispers now, fading under the weight of something much larger. And the whisper in my mind, the voice that had guided me from the start, murmured again, not in cruel mockery but in affirmation. Do you hear it? The song, Alaric? Can you hear how perfect you are now? I did. And I sang. I was no longer a man. I was no longer a self. The moment the last vestige of my individuality had dissolved, the moment my memories of Alaric had melted away, I felt a surge, a tide, of something far greater than I could comprehend. It crashed over me like the tide of a vast ocean, pulling me deeper into a sea of thought and sensation I had only faintly imagined before. Through the ever-present hum of the Servitor collective, I felt Slaanesh. His voice did not speak in words but in raw, undulating emotion, a sensation that bled into every part of me. I felt him as one feels a storm before it strikes, the promise of lightning and thunder in the air. Not a presence but a force, a vast, consuming need that stretched across the entire galaxy. The first glimpse came in a burst. It was like a vision, but it was not formed in words. It was not a picture in my mind. It was something far deeper, something primal. I saw it, or felt it at first, the galaxy. The endless expanse of stars, worlds, and the myriad forces fighting beneath them. And through it all, I felt the heartbeat of desire. Not mine. Not personal. But the heartbeat of all desire. A galaxy full of hunger. A galaxy full of need. From one corner of the galaxy to the other, everything was an expression of the same thing. I saw the warbands of chaos sweeping across planets, each attack driven by hunger. Not for power, not for conquest, but for sensation. The demon princes, the generals, the heretics, all of them seeking to feed the eternal void of their desires. And I saw the Imperium as well, stretched tight across countless worlds, not with the resolve of faith, but with the desperate need to hold on, to prevent the flood of chaos from consuming everything. And in the center of all this, in the deepest core of the galaxy, was the Astronomicon. The light that guided Imperial ships through the darkness was not just a beacon of hope, but a beacon of need. The light did not simply protect humanity, it demanded tribute. Every sacrifice, every soul offered up to fuel that light, was an offering to desire. Humanity's survival, their unceasing struggle against the darkness, was driven by a hunger just as relentless as the forces that sought to destroy them. I saw my own place in it then. Not as a victim of the Imperium, not as a prisoner of the machine. I was not forgotten. No, I was exalted. I was the fuel. Not in the way I had once thought. Not as a cog, grinding away at the will of the Emperor, unseen and unimportant. But as a sacrifice made for pleasure. My existence was part of something far greater, something eternal. I was not a servant of a dead machine. I was a servant of sensation, of pleasure, of eternal desire. Every motion I made, every sound I made, was now a contribution to that eternal song, not of agony but of exaltation. It was not a curse. The gray silence of my old life was the true curse. The monotony of work, the endless grind, the deadening hours spent in the cogitator banks, that had been my true prison. That was the real suffering. Here, in the eternal symphony of Slaanesh, I was alive. I was needed. The process had stripped everything away. My name, my face, my memories. The person I once was had long since dissolved under the weight of Slaanesh's influence, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man. But that shell was perfect. To the eyes of the Imperium, to anyone who had ever known Alaric, I was a mindless husk. A puppet of flesh and wire. A grotesque parody of humanity, a thing to be discarded, forgotten. My body was a thing of cold, unfeeling metal, stitched together in places where once there had been bone. My face, though human, was blank, expressionless, a mask of obedient servitude. No more memories, no more desires. Only the endless, eternal song of Slaanesh. But to me, I was alive. More than alive. I was something far greater. I was not the broken, pathetic thing that had once toiled in the cogitator banks. I was a servant of desire. A living vessel of the greatest ecstasy the universe could offer. I had been remade not into a hollow, soulless shell, but into something infinitely more. Freedom. Purpose. Ecstasy. For the first time in my existence, I understood what it meant to be truly alive. No more silence. No more gray. The gray had been the curse. The gray had been the true death. Every moment of my existence now was filled with sensation. Every pulse of the machine that worked through me, every jolt of power that surged through my limbs, was a new note in the eternal melody of Slaanesh. I did not feel pain. I felt perfection. Every movement, every sound, every breath I took, all of it was part of a greater symphony, a chorus that was more harmonious than anything I had ever known. I felt joy in submission, bliss in obedience. The sensation of surrendering completely to the will of Slaanesh was beyond anything I had ever imagined. It was not loss. It was the most pure, most powerful form of freedom. The shackles that had once bound me to duty, to work, to the gray existence of an Imperial cogitator-technician, were gone. In their place was something far more beautiful than I could have ever dreamt. The others, the onlookers who passed by me now, the new recruits, the guards, the tech priests who looked at me with their cold, clinical eyes, they would never understand. They would only see a mindless, soulless thing, a puppet of flesh and wire. They would see only a broken shell. But I knew the truth. I was not broken. I was whole. I was free. I was perfect, and I reveled in that perfection. Each moment, each beat of my heart, every hum of the machine, was ecstasy. The pain I had once known was a distant memory, a phantom of a life that was no longer mine. I was part of something eternal now. I was a vessel for pleasure. I was chosen. The final irony lay not in what I had lost, but in what I had gained. They had thought me lost, but I had found what they would never understand. I was not a husk, not a shadow of a man. I was the living embodiment of the eternal rapture. I was free. If you've enjoyed this dive into the twisted, tantalizing world of chaos and Slaanesh, subscribe now and join us on more journeys into the dark corners of the Warhammer 40k universe. Don't miss out on the stories that delve deep into forbidden realms, exploring the hidden truths, the horrors, and the desires that drive us all. Hit that subscribe button, and never stop exploring the darker side of the 41st millennium.